I came across a Facebook post this week that asked, "What is the biggest waste of money on a homestead?" The original poster's answer was raised garden beds. Well, that lit a match. Hundreds of comments poured in. Some people completely agreed. Others defended their raised beds like they were members of the family. And as I read through these comments, I realized something. Nobody was really arguing about raised beds. They were arguing about what makes something worth buying. And I think that's a much more interesting conversation. This is the Joyfully Prepared podcast, and I'm your host, Wendy Bergen. Thank you so much for listening. I've got people in Greece and Helsinki, Finland, and India, which is amazing to me, and Pakistan, Australia, all over the world. People are listening to this podcast, and I am humbled and so appreciative. Thank you for sharing it with other people as well. So, when we're talking about this question, I'm in a bunch of different homesteading Facebook groups. And the question was, what's the biggest waste of money on a homestead? Everybody's going to have an opinion because for some it's going to be one and for some it's going to be other. But what is the actual problem that somebody wants to solve? This is where I think we often get ourselves into trouble. We see someone else's beautiful garden, chicken coop, greenhouse, or expensive piece of equipment, and we think, I need that too. But before we buy anything, we need to stop and ask ourselves one simple question: what problem am I trying to solve? For example, many of the people defending the raised beds weren't trying to grow prettier tomatoes. They were trying to solve a problem. One had clay soil, somebody else had bedrock, someone else had constant flooding, so they needed to raise the garden up so when it flooded, it wouldn't wash their plants away. They had had too much of that. Somebody had moles and gophers eating everything, and you can put underneath a raised bed, you can put chicken wire or it's called hardware cloth, landscape material that will help prevent the moles, the gophers, things coming up from the bottom. And that's what they decided to do. Somebody was fighting Bermuda grass. Again, and if you grow in Florida, good gosh, I have raised beds. I have a food forest, which I love, but there is a lot of weeds, but it's taking care of itself pretty much. I have to go out there and tend to it, but I've got this nice little system. But I do have raised beds that are in the food forest, and I've tried to grow in the ground here in Florida, like a regular garden, and it's just a bear. My gosh. You have different reasons that people choose to grow their gardens in raised beds. Some people couldn't bend over anymore. They're getting older because of back injuries, arthritis. They're very different situations. The raised bed wasn't the goal, it was the solution. And that's what we have to think about when we're homesteading and we think we want something or we need something. If you don't have that particular problem, if you don't have back problems or arthritis or grass or gophers or clay soil, then you might not need raised beds. That's why I don't think we should ask, are raised beds worth it? I think we should ask, are raised beds worth it for me? And I think as you carry that question in your mind as you're homesteading or doing anything really, this isn't just for homesteading, it's anything. Is this going to be something that's going to be worth it to me? I noticed something else in the comments. Very few people talked only about money. They also talked about time. And again, the raised beds answer is just an example of other things that you could talk about. It could be a chicken coop, it could be fencing, it could be another outbuilding, it could be any way that your systems need to run, right? So, talking about time. In this case, talking about weeding, I don't have to weed as much. I don't have to till every year. They don't have to run a tiller through it. It's easier to water. I spend less time fighting my soil. And that's important because time is really the only thing we don't get back. I learned this a long time ago. I learned that Time is so precious. We do not get it back. And so if you can save some time and a bad back by putting in raised beds, go ahead and do it. But if it's not that important to you, it doesn't need to happen, right? Sometimes we become so focused on saving $20 that we end up wasting 20 hours. And if something saves you hours every week for the next 10 years, that's worth considering. Your time has value. You are valuable. Time is part of the value of your life. Preparedness isn't just about saving money, it's about creating margin, the space so that you can do the things that you love to do. Another one that stood out to me was many people mentioned arthritis, back injuries, disabilities. There was somebody who mentioned that she has a spouse recovering from a stroke. Somebody just said, okay, well, a few people just said, I'm getting older. That's it. Honest, right? Because here's the truth, the right homestead at the age of 25 isn't necessarily the right homestead at the age of 65, which I am closer to the latter than I am to the former. Sometimes we judge ourselves because we aren't doing things the hard way. I have done that, and I still kinda do that in a way. Like, "Oh, I used to be able to do this or that," and I don't want to do that anymore. My time is more valuable. My body is more valuable. The aches and the pains, let me tell you this. I have a friend who I bought my goats from this friend, and she doesn't live very far from me, and she and her family wanted to go on a little vacation over the weekend, and she asked if I would take care of her goats and milk her goats for her, and I'm like, "Absolutely, I'm happy to do this." I only had to do it 4 times, once on Friday evening, 2 times on Saturday, and once Sunday morning, and no problem. Let me tell she had 6 goats to milk on in the mornings and only 2 to milk in the evenings, and I used to milk a ton of not a ton, but I think I had 6, 5 or 6 or so in milk at one time. This is when I was raising goats in New Jersey, and I would hand milk some of them. Then we got a milking machine that was way better, saves a lot of time, oh my gosh, and a lot of back break as well. So I went to her house, she showed me everything, she wrote down instructions, I went and did this thing, and oh my gosh, my hands hurt because in the evenings, there's just 2 goats to milk, so we just hand milk them. But my hands haven't milked goats in 10 plus years, and so even though my hands know how to milk the goats, the muscles in my hands haven't been worked like that in a really long time. But I did it, and then I had to I didn't know who the goats were, you know what I mean? Like, they don't know me, and they just want food, period, so they were just, like, ganging up on me. They were ganging up on me. And I had to, pull them in my hands. I had to pull them off and do this and do that and wrestle with these goats. It was a fiasco at times. And I laughed. I out laughed a lot. And I did film a little bit of this. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so funny to me that what was so easy at one point in my life, 10, 15 years ago, is it's her system too, by the way. And she has a lovely system, but I have to fit into that system and learn that system. If I had my own, that would be a little different. But, I'm looking at this now. Here I am 58 versus, like I said, 10 or 15 years ago when I was younger and I had children at home that would help me. And I'm thinking maybe 2 goats is going to be plenty. Like, I don't think I'm going to need any more than 2 ever. And, I did go into this thinking that I didn't want many goats. If I got goats, I knew what I wanted. So, this is a different stage of my life. It's a different season for me. So, it was good to be reminded of that, and I'm so grateful that I got a chance to serve my friend and to milk these goats and just to be around it. So, that could be the hard way, right? Maybe the goal is to keep gardening for another 20 years, going back to the raised beds. If raised beds allow someone with arthritis to grow fresh vegetables instead of giving up gardening altogether, I would call that a wonderful investment. So, and people did agree. Remember, this is a Facebook post in a homesteading group that I'm in about what is the biggest waste of money on a homestead. The answer that the original poster gave was raised beds. So that's why we're talking about raised beds. So This next point, a lot of people agreed. Very few people defended spending hundreds of dollars on fancy raised beds. So they're like, you don't need to spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars on fancy raised bed. Many said things like, I built mine from pallets. I used old barrels. I cut trees down. I used trees that had been cut down on my property. I found cinder blocks. That's how we did ours in the very beginning. Sam would make me cinder block raised beds. They had a very joyfully prepared mindset. So they were looking at different ways that they could accomplish the same purpose. The question isn't always, should I buy this? Sometimes it's, how can I create the same result with what I already have? Get your mind thinking, right? Resourcefulness is often more valuable than having a big budget. And plus, if you can save money on certain things like that, like raised beds or different pieces of your homesteading, it frees up other money to do bigger projects. All right. So one of the biggest, most overlooked questions was, most of us, yeah, we look at the price tag. We don't think about everything that comes after the purchase. So going along with what's the biggest waste of money on a homestead, and we've been talking about raised beds as the example, but there were other answers to this as well. Some of the answers went like this. Several people mentioned horses. I know those of you who love horses and are horse people, you're gasping right now. But there's a reason. Some people mentioned rabbits. Some regretted buying cheap tools because they kept having to replace them because they were cheap. Others talked about feed costs. So going back to the horse, you have to keep the horse fed. You have to keep the horse shoed and the vet has to come out. Those are big those are big price tags because it's such a big animal. So I had goats in New Jersey, like I said, and I had what they call standard size, so like the larger breeds. I had La Manchas, which I love. I had a Saanen, and then I had a couple of these Nigerian Dwarf goats. So they're the smaller breed. And the larger breeds, the standard breeds, they ate a lot of food. They ate a lot of hay, they ate a lot of feed, and they did produce a lot of milk, which was really good because I had a big family at the time. But I decided that if I ever got goats here in Florida, I would get the Nigerian Dwarf goats, mainly because, well, I found out later that they do really well down here. But the reason why is because they're smaller goats. They eat less food, less feed, less hay. They do produce less milk, but they have the highest butterfat content in goat milk, which means they produce a lot of cream. It's a very thick and rich milk. It's delicious, absolutely delicious. But I knew I wanted smaller goats because I wanted to save on the feed costs and the hay costs. That was my reason, for real. Because you have, and going back to this point, that yeah, you make the purchase, but then you have things, especially for animals, you have feed costs. And if it's other types of things like tools, a tractor, something along those, you have maintenance. You have to store these things, animals too, right? Repairs. You have to think about that as far as equipment. The purchase price is only the beginning. Every decision has a lifetime cost in homesteading. And that's true whether we're talking about a tractor, a greenhouse, livestock, or even a house. It's actually something I think about in real estate all the time. People often ask, can I afford the mortgage? But that's only one piece of the puzzle. Can you afford the maintenance, the insurance, the repairs, the property taxes? The best decision is rarely the one with the smallest upfront price. It's the one that you can comfortably sustain. Okay, so we have to think about, yeah, we can buy it today, but do you have a place for it? You see these little baby chicks in the Tractor Supply, the farm store, and you're like, I want these baby chicks. And you don't think anything of it because they're cute and little fluffy and they go peep, 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 peep. And they're so stinking adorable. But in less than a week, they just become stinking. They stink because they poop, right? We talked about poop. And you have to have a place to put those little birds when you bring them home from the tractor store, the farm store. You have to have a place for them before you bring them home. If you want to get them, but they've got to have a place. You've got to have a warming light or something to keep them warm because they don't have feathers to stay warm. You have to have a way to feed them, a way to you have to teach them how to drink. They don't know how to drink. You need to know different things, but they've got to have a house. They have to have a place to go and live and grow. And that's the case with any animal that you bring on. You have to have a place for them to live where they can be safe out in your yard. You're not gonna leave them in the inside, trust me. That is not the answer. That is not the right answer. So kinda going back to this discussion, this might be the biggest lesson from the entire discussion or answers in this post. People were gardening in Florida, going back to the raised beds, just this conversation. They were gardening in the mountains on clay, bedrock, sand. Some people have hurricanes. Some people have snow. Some people had a little backyard. Some people had many acres. They couldn't all agree on this answer because everybody lives somewhere differently. They're solving completely different problems. One of the biggest mistakes we make is trying to copy someone else's homestead without understanding their circumstances. Yes, there's overlap. There are many overlaps, just kind of rules. For instance, you've got to have a place to bring home those little chickies. They're not gonna sleep in your bedroom with you. I just don't recommend that. They're cute, but they start to stink. We've got to remember there is overlap, things that you probably should and shouldn't do, but that doesn't mean that my way is the only way to get something done or it's the best way. It might be the best way for me here in Florida, but it might not work so well for me when I lived up in New Jersey, or if you live in Alaska, or if you're somebody who lives in Germany, or you're somebody who lives in Pakistan and you're listening, you're like, I can't do that. You have to do what's best for you, what solves your problems with the situation. So, what works beautifully on their property might be a terrible investment on yours. Preparedness is personal. It's not one size fits all. So you have to take those into consideration. So here's another thing, because this is kind of a unexpected twist to this discussion on Facebook about what's the biggest waste of money on a homestead. It might be my favorite part of the conversation, actually. One woman admitted that she spends money on flowers. She knows that they don't make any money. She knows that they don't feed the family. She just loves them. Someone else said their grandmother always grew beautiful flower gardens simply because they made her happy. That makes me happy. That's a wonderful thing because not everything on a homestead has to produce an income. Not everything has to pay for itself. Sometimes beauty is the value. Sometimes peace is the value. Joy is part of stewardship too. Joy is part of this. It's not a waste of money to do these things. If it brings you joy, it can be there. I love walking out in my food forest and I check on everything and I look at it, I'm like, "Oh my gosh, you're doing so good," or "This is happening," or "Oh, what happened here? Who's eating my plant?" Because that brings me joy. The food forest does provide food for me, but there is more to it than just a purpose. There is the purpose of just watching God do his thing in my front yard and being so thankful for that. So, are raised beds a waste of money? Maybe, maybe not. The better question is, does this purchase solve a real problem in my life? If it saves your back, your arthritic hands, your time, does it fit your land? If it fits your budget, if it helps you continue doing something you love, then it may be one of the best investments you'll ever make. Preparedness isn't about buying what everyone else buys. That is true. Again, there's overlap. You need to have a water filter, you need to have storage. But we've talked about this. Food storage isn't one size fits all either. This homesteading investments, everybody's going to think through this differently because of the way it solves their problem. It's about making thoughtful decisions that fit your family, your property, your season of life, and your goals. That's what being joyfully prepared is all about, right? It's fun to homestead. It's cuckoo and crazy, and I go, "How did that happen?" But I'm thankful for the opportunity God gives me to work with his creation to create other things, to create gardens and watch food grow and use it to heal my body, to be a steward over little chickens and to talk to them and welcome them into the day. When I open the door, I'm like, "Good morning." And the little goats, and I'm like, "Good morning, sisters." But to have this opportunity to learn how to work on my land, whether I had 5 acres, 20 acres, or a backyard doesn't matter to me. It's what's working for me in this season of life today, and what is my goal? What do I need to do to purchase perhaps or to create from what I already have? What do I need in order to solve a problem? That's what we're doing here today. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it. I hope you know that you are important, that you are loved. I love you, and I hope you enjoy your day.